This was the first time I've dealt with something that I couldn't understand. Before all this happened, I never believed that unexplainable things could occur, but now I'm certain that the supernatural is true. This story happened right after I started this job. My supervisor and I were at our office doing paperwork when we received a call from a middle-aged lady who claimed there was a strange female at her apartment. Naturally, we had to investigate her claim and help her if possible. We rushed to her apartment and arrived right around 6:30 p.m. The lady was waiting for us outside, afraid of entering her apartment. My superior asked her a couple of questions and learned that she had always felt as if someone was observing her. She also said that as soon as she noticed she was not alone, she ran to the door and locked it to keep whoever it was inside. After we were done with questioning her, we opened the door and attempted to investigate the scene. The apartment was so small and the windows were barred, which meant that there was no room for someone to hide or escape. We searched every corner of the house and found no trace of an intruder. Nonetheless, I had a strange feeling that someone was watching me. I felt as if there was someone walking with my superior and I, unseen by either of us. Anyway, we had one more place to search before leaving, her bedroom. I was searching her closet before I felt someone creeping on me, so I turned around immediately and pointed my firearm at them. To my relief, it was the lady. Despite our orders not to enter, she followed us. I should point out that unlike when we found her outside, she was unusually calm this time. We checked with her and nothing was stolen, thankfully. It was about time we left this creepy place, but before leaving, my superior asked her to seek professional help because she might be having some mental issues. Here's the crazy part. 2 weeks after this strange business, we received a call from the same lady again. Her voice was strange on the phone, but she kept repeating, "Please help me," and then hung up the phone. Though we suspected she might be imagining things like the last time, we decided it was better to confirm her claims. So we reached her apartment a little after 9 p.m. and stormed in. The first place we checked was her bedroom, and to our surprise, we found her body. I called the ambulance as fast as possible while my superior examined her corpse. The creepiest part is that she had been dead for a while. Though I may be inexperienced, my superior has seen enough dead bodies to know that she was dead long before she called us. It didn't appear to be a murder because there were no signs of a struggle. It took the ambulance 10 minutes to arrive and we got a second opinion. She had been dead for a week now, but the cause of death was unknown. My superior was far calmer than I was, but he was still in a state of disbelief. We decided not to discuss this incident ever again, and to this day, I shiver whenever I remember this particular incident. Although it was definitely the first, it wasn't the last strange occurrence I've ever run into over the course of this job. I'm a police officer, but that's as far as I'll go with my identity. No places, people, or any identifiable personal information. It's the only way I can protect myself. I work in a city on what we call the shift. I spend most of my time policing a suburb. It's a pretty average place, has its good streets and bad, the occasional suspicious death and some low-level gang problems, but nowhere near as widespread as other areas. I've been a cop for 9 years and my partner at the moment is a female officer just in her first year of duty. We'll call her Jan for now. So 16 days ago I'm walking alongside a river in the area. It's broad daylight. No one's really around, but we check the riverside occasionally, because a few junkies hang out there sometimes, and I'm never comfortable with that, because there's a school just a few streets away. So I walk down there with Jan to see if any of the usuals are there to move them on. But the place is dead. Really quiet. It's not a big river. In fact, it's more like a canal and a path goes along it where people can fish or cycle. Jan spotted it first. A boat coming down the water. The problem was that it was clearly unmanned, scraping along the river's edge. It was unusual, but I had seen this happen once before. Some old drunk had left his boat and not tied it up properly. I assumed something similar had happened. Anyway, it can be dangerous, obviously, for other boats. And if it had got damaged and sank, then we'd have to close off the river as a hazard. I'm a pretty fast runner and thought straight away that I could get to the boat as long as it was near the path. I bolted quickly. Poor Jan could hardly keep up. But as I got to the boat, something caught my eye. A smear of blood on a window. I was lucky. The boat was near enough, so I jumped on board and threw the rope attached to the front of the hull to Jan, who had finally caught up. There was a wooden post a few meters away and she quickly tied the rope to it. The boat juddered slightly, but it stopped easily. Jan jumped aboard and I pointed the blood out to her right away. She looked uncomfortable, but that's to be expected from someone without experience, and the fact that the area was really quiet. I'd go as far as to say there was a bit of an eerie atmosphere. The boat was about 30 feet long, and it was clear that there were 2 cabins, one on top for whoever drove the boat, and probably a small room underneath to sleep in, maybe even a tiny kitchen area. I peered into the driver's cabin, but it was dark inside, so I couldn't see a thing. I walked around the back and found the door open. There was a smell of oil or paraffin, and while the cabin was empty, it was clear that there had been some sort of a struggle. The floor was littered with books that had been knocked off of a shelf. I could see the blood on the window and droplets leading back out of the room. Jan was now behind me as we followed the trail to a hatch at the back of the boat. I shouted first to see if anyone was below, but I got no response. I may be experienced, but I'm never crazy about going into a confined space with God knows who hiding there. It was dark below and I pulled out my torch to get a proper view as I went down the stairs. I could hear Jan's nervous breath above as I called it in. There on the floor were 2 bodies. I'm no forensics expert, but it was clear that they had killed one another. One body lay on top. The man underneath had shoved a large kitchen knife under the ribs of what looked like to be his attacker. Death must have been quick, but not quick enough. The man on top had plunged a weapon into his victim's neck. It looked similar to a screwdriver with a pointed tip, but gave me the impression that it was for killing, the point protruding from the side. Both men had then died, almost impaled together, and the smell of blood, which you never get used to, was horrific, as both men had bled out over the entire cabin floor. Look, I don't mean to sound thoughtless, but while this whole thing was creepy as hell and brutal, you come to expect finding dead bodies as a cop to a degree. What I didn't expect was the response. I had called it in over the radio reporting a suspected double homicide, but we have procedures for these sort of things. A medical team. We're not allowed to pronounce someone dead even if it's obvious. Forensics, etc. None of them showed. Instead, a group of what seemed to be plainclothed police appeared and took over immediately. 4 cars full of them to be precise. Their IDs were all in order, but nothing like this had ever happened before. I don't want to identify the region I work, so all I'll say is that the officers from my country's intelligence agency then appeared and made myself and Jan sign a bunch of documents. You're going to think that this is crazy, but I didn't read them. I don't know what happened, but I had this desire to just get away from that boat and from those 2 corpses. Sometimes you just feel in your gut that you're in danger, and that's what I felt. We were specifically told that under legislation, which to be fair to them I am aware of, that this was now a matter of national security. If either me or Jan spoke a word of this to anyone, we could go to jail. We left as quickly as we could. So why am I writing all of this then? Why am I putting my career in jeopardy? Because I'm angry. I can deal with the fact that I know that I'm being watched. I've seen the same couple of people shadowing me in different locations at different times. Too much of a coincidence. I can also deal with the fact that Jan has transferred to another station and won't return my calls. That's fair enough. She's young and has worked hard to be a cop. She doesn't want to lose that. But there are some things I can't deal with. I can't deal with visiting my ex-wife and finding what looks suspiciously like an electronic bug in my 5-year-old daughter's room, inside a light fitting that was playing up. I also can't deal with the memory of those corpses. The looks on their faces were different to me from what I've seen before. I keep having nightmares about them. It was as if their faces were frozen in hatred, but it was more than that. Looking back, playing it over in my head, it seems clear to me now. The blood wasn't dripping from the driver's cabin to the hatch, but from the hatch to the cabin after those 2 men were dead. Someone else was on that boat, and I'm convinced whoever it was left that trail into the driver's cabin deliberately. There was something in there I was supposed to see, but I just can't think what it could have been. I'm submitting this now, and you can disregard it as fake or whatever. I just felt like maybe if I talked about this, I could get a good night's sleep. I have been a member of the New South Wales Police Force for 33 years, and what I witnessed on this night was something I know I will never get rid of from my mind, and will most likely be with me until the day I die. It was about 2:25 a.m. on a quiet Thursday evening, and my shift was ending at 3 a.m., which meant I was in a good mood as the shift had been relatively easy. That was until I was assigned to a job to investigate reports of screaming and distressed cries of help from a property surrounded by bushland. Now, the calls to investigate this property were frequent, and I assumed it would go as it always did. I would arrive with my flashing blue and red lights, no sirens, and drive down the driveway to witness a rather large house surrounded by dense bush and trees. No lights would be visible as the house was unoccupied due to the owners going missing a few years earlier. I told my partner Matthew, not his real name, that we had been called to the house again. "Let's go there, find nothing, and report back," he said, grabbing his hat and gulping down the last of his lukewarm tea. Fast forward 20 minutes to 2:45 a.m., and we arrived at the gates which separated the already hidden house from the road. We slowly drove down the long driveway, observing the trees on either side of us to ensure all was calm. It was silent. There was no action of any sort on the driveway, and we found nothing at the house. At least that's what we thought would happen. On this night, there was an eerie feeling creeping up on us as we drew closer to the house. Matthew was ready to radio our commanding officer the news that nothing was amiss until we arrived at the other side of the driveway. The house stood there, silent and proud, shrouded as always, yet, unlike the other times here, there was a light on in the living room. We ensured our tasers were ready to go in the event of an aggressive intruder and got out of the police car, leaving the headlights on and pointed at the house. "The front door is locked and no windows appear to be damaged," Matthew whispered, eyeing the single light in the living room. We simultaneously approached the front door and knocked with a heavy thud. Nothing. We knocked a second time, hoping the occupants didn't hear the first knock, and still there was nothing. This is where it gets creepy. Upon knocking for a third time, Matthew went stiff as a statue and began shaking. "What? What can you see?" I stopped. I could feel goosebumps forming on my arms. Peering out a window from the second floor was a person. A woman wearing a white gown was staring down at us. We couldn't see her clearly as the window was foggy, but we knew it was a woman, aged around 21. Matthew was petrified, and I can't blame him for being so. I called out to the woman and demanded she open the front door. She stared for a few more moments and turned around and walked off. We could hear footsteps coming down the rickety staircase on the other side of the door, and braced ourselves to stand face to face with the woman. Then it all went silent as it once was. Matthew put a hand on his radio and notified the commander that there was a possible intruder, and we needed an extra car as support. Before the commander answered, an almighty bang ricocheted through the house. It sounded like a gunshot, so Matthew and I hightailed it back to the car and took cover behind it against the trunk. Matthew turned his head to me, looking back at the house as more bangs followed. I was texting my wife that there were possible gunshots and that I loved her. Paul, you need to look now," Matthew said to me. The fear was amplified through his voice as he said this. I slowly peeked around the side of the car and almost shrieked at what I saw. The living room light was off, but now the entire second floor was illuminated by a green light. A bright green light. We studied it, slowly calming ourselves and reassuring one another that backup was coming. The banging stopped, and when we were ready, we ventured very slowly back towards the house, almost crawling. As we got to the front porch, we heard another sound. Not a footstep or a loud bang. This sound was a blood-curdling scream that has stuck with me to this day. We couldn't wait any longer for backup. We breached the front door, guns drawn, and followed the source of the screaming together. We dare not split up in a place like this. Not tonight. We went upstairs ever so slowly, not blinking and hyper-vigilant of our surroundings. The green light was coming from the room where we saw the woman. As I neared the door, Matthew bumped a vase and it fell with a loud crack. The second it hit the ground, we heard a male voice yelling to us.
"Hey, what are you doing here?"
He yelled. "My name is Senior Constable Cooper of the Junior Police. Show yourself," I yelled firmly.
"You have no idea what you have stumbled across, Senior Constable,"
the man said, thumping something, prompting more screams. I said nothing and readied myself for the other side. I gave the door one hard kick and it came tumbling down. Inside was a circle of blood, 15 to 20 green candles, and a white gown that looked brand new. There was no sign of anyone in the room at that time, and we were certain the screams and talking came from here. "What is this?" I said, once again turning to face Matthew. But Matthew was nowhere to be seen. Matthew! Matthew! I called a dozen times to no avail. I could hear sirens in the distance, and as I looked out the window, I could see distinct red and blue flashing lights through the trees. Backup was here, but Matthew was not. For the next 35 minutes, I searched the house from top to bottom for Matthew with the 3 officers that had just arrived. I ventured down into a cellar under the kitchen and found something that haunts me to this day. Matthew's credentials, identifying him as a member of the New South Wales Police, as well as his gun, and 3 bloody fingers placed neatly on the ground. I screamed at the top of my lungs for the other officers to come to me and call for forensics, and virtually everyone available at the time. By the time I got home, it was 5:30 a.m. and the sun was rising. Matthew was never seen again, nor did forensics find any trace of him. The fingers found were identified as his. 2 of them were. The 3rd was unknown and remains unknown to this day. It took me 45 minutes after getting home to decide to resign effective immediately. It's been almost 10 years since that night, and I still hear the screams of that woman and the distinct voice that warned me in that house. Please, if you ever hear screaming in the middle of the night, call the proper law enforcement. Do not venture by yourself to investigate.